Could you please state your name for the camera?
My name's Quinn Weldon.
Alright. Okay, so once more. Do you think the character Patrick Bateman still represents a typical rich stockbroker yuppie? Why or why not?
In some ways, yes. I think that idea of kind of losing your own humanity and losing what makes you you to be a part of a larger group definitely still exists today. And I think it's definitely a problem with that kind of sect of society right now, especially with the rich people, because people are always wanting to buy, the Rolexes and the nice cars and the perfect suits. And he spends, like that in that first scene, he spends the entire time talking about the moisturizer he uses on his face and the different products he uses to paint the picture of Patrick Bateman, which isn't actually him. So I think that is similar, but I think the context has changed a bit just with like modern. I think it just works differently, but I think it's still an accurate representation of like the psyche of a lot of those people.
Do you think they're business cards that they seem to pawn over as part of that psyche?
Well, yeah, I think that the business card scene was like a direct kind of measuring contest, if you can. Just a show of power and dominance over each other. I think that absolutely still exists. I think it's being taken down a little bit. I mean, I think we're kind of moving away from that as a society a little, because there's more room for people who are, non-binary, non-gender specific, like things like that. And I think there's more room for people on a spectrum, not male or female. I mean, that's kind of getting off the topic, but I think that still exists, yes. Because I think those types of business people are very stuck in that way of thinking about each other, where they're all on a kind of totem pole, and whoever's got the nicest business card, even though they're all black and white, they're like the specific type of black ink on like this like cream, like perfect cream paper, and it's like embossed, and just whoever has the nicest card has the biggest wiener, essentially. I mean, that's really that's really what I think that scene was alluding to, is like a pretty obvious comparison.
Right. The film was met with a lot of dissenting reviews due to its graphic nature and themes. Do you think it will still meet this? Do you think it would still meet the same level of audience disgust if it was re-released in theaters today and like no one had seen it before?
Yeah, it was in the 90s, so I mean, we still had like pretty intense gore before then, but I think it was met with such criticism because of how the violence was taken out and how the violence was acted upon others. Because I mean, it was gory, but I mean, look at movies like Halloween and just any other slasher really that came out in that kind of golden age. I mean, we're not talking about, I don't think people were talking about the gore when it met with criticism. I think the gore was an easy scapegoat to point out, hey, look, that's not good. We shouldn't be, endorsing violence like this. When people really didn't have, I don't ever remember hearing so much criticism about, again, Halloween or like The Thing, So I don't think it would be met with the same criticism, but I think back then it wasn't met with criticism because of the gore. I think it was met with criticism because of the way the violence was taken out, because it's is more of a psychological turmoil that he was going through, and it was a very biting critique of that class of people. And I think that most likely critics at the time were closer to that class of people than anyone else who was talking about the movie. I think it's hard for people to look at such a challenging view of the world we live in. So when you see that this violence is being enacted upon people and women especially.
Do you think audiences have become more desensitized to violence and nudity since the release of American Psycho? Do you think audiences want even more edgy material than we have even now?
Whenever I hear desensitization, I always think about how the Columbine shooters, they were listening to violent music, they were playing violent video games. I don't think the desensitization of people leads to wanting to kill people. I just think it leads to knowing about it more. I think these violence is part of our world, whether we like it or not, and knowing about it doesn't really change that. And to answer the last part of the question, yes, I do think there is more of an audience today that wants like edgy material, because I mean humans have always had a morbid curiosity with violence and death and things like that, the gruesomeness of war, or violence in general, really. So yeah, I would say yes.
Audiences and critics alike said the movie was misogynistic and narcissistic. Do you think audiences now would agree? Do you agree?
I mean, yeah, I think that's the point of the movie, though. It's supposed to be misogynistic. What's her name? Patty something? Is that who directed?
The director?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a woman director.
Yeah, I think she meant it that way because it's again a biting criticism on that class of mostly men, if not all men, who, thought of themselves as idols and everyone else, especially women, as things. So I think that it is misogynistic and narcissistic to a point where she meant it to be.
Do you believe that will reach a point where violence and sex in film will reach a point it'll be no different from real life imagery?
Like pornographic?
Pornographic.
Um,
But just as time has gone on, the imagery of it has increased.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I don't know if that's good or bad. I mean, I know that there's this one quote. I forget who said it, but it's like, I can't tell you what porn is, but I know it when I see it. I feel like it's a different intent, because if you're just representing sex in a movie, I think it's a lot different than if it's just porn, because pornography inherently is used for a different reason than to depict sex. Depicting sex in a movie is a story element, and in this film specifically is to show how he treats women in that intimate environment. So I think, yeah, it's going to continue to get more, more prevalent in film as people get more comfortable with seeing things like that. I mean, still there are lots of people who fight back against it with the "think of the children" argument, but I think I don't know. I don't think that's scarring anyone, really. It's just the body. That's just my opinion.
What do you say about violence?
Violence, things are definitely getting more violent as time goes on, I would say. I'm surprised by some things I see in movies. All explicit things like sex, violence, and swear words are all kind of explicit things. I feel like those are the big three, like nudity, violence, and that are all three things that kind of put red marks or red checks on a movie if it's in it, and that kind of like ramps it up to the R or even further categories. So I think it's the whole bar is rising. I don't think it's any like specific part. So I think all explicit things are kind of getting more accepted, I would say. But I'm not really sure, and I don't think this movie has much to do with that, because this like violence in an action movie is so much different than violence in this, because violence in a Transformers movie is just a spectacle. In this, it's again a criticism, and it's upsetting to watch.